We've been married forever. Maybe I'll like someone else. So what if I have a fling or two? Stop bothering me, yelled Anthony when I confronted him about cheating. Just focus on Christmas. You've got all the decorations and cake ready, right? I'm spending Christmas at my mom's, I replied. Anthony then handed me a paper from the drawer. What if you're really leaving? Here's a divorce form. I opened it and saw Anthony's name on it. Why do you already have this ready? The woman you're seeing, she's the one you really love. Oh, is that how it is? Caught cheating with a woman 20 years younger, and now he's sticking to his story. Fuming with anger, I signed the divorce papers with bigger letters than usual. The tears streaming down my face aren't because I'm sad. I just feel pitiful for being with such a man. Well then, Anthony needs to learn a lesson. I packed my things, left the house, went straight to the town hall's after-hours window, and submitted the divorce papers. Anthony not only listed his own name on the divorce papers but also arranged for a witness, the woman he's cheating with. He's really humiliating me. As I walked away from the town hall, I kicked a stone with all my strength and kept walking. I'm Margaret, a 55-year-old housewife who works as an administrative assistant at an insurance agency. My daughter Tasha is already married and lives nearby. Since Tasha finished her 2-year college, I've been living with my husband, Anthony. He quit his job and has been calling himself a day trader for the past 10 years, not contributing much to our expenses. I supported Anthony financially while feeling resentful towards him. And now, this affair and divorce application are the result. Before Tasha finished her 2-year college program, Anthony was a typical husband working at a financial firm. He didn't help with household chores, but had a routine of going to work in the morning and returning home at night. He occasionally had overnight business trips and company gatherings. He wasn't excessive in drinking or spending. He was just an average husband. Yet, in hindsight, there were hints of odd behavior. Given his profession, I assumed his business trips and social events were standard. However, it's possible he was involved in affairs during some of those occasions. His only flaw as an otherwise typical husband was his penchant for women. Guess what? My friend landed a job at Dad's company. Tasha once mentioned before she got married. Dad's got quite the reputation there. He's always flirting with the younger women and insists on having female companions at every office party. Seems like he just enjoys being around younger women. Wow, that's quite embarrassing. And there are rumors about affairs, so be careful too, Mom. Tasha cautioned me. Until Tasha mentioned it, I never suspected Anthony of infidelity. With my own full-time job and the entire burden of housework and childcare on my shoulders, I had no time to notice Anthony's actions. Even when I was overwhelmed with chores, Anthony remained seated, refusing to help, and he wouldn't even comfort a crying Tasha when she was little. He believed household tasks and childcare were solely the wife's responsibility. He seemed to think that as long as he worked, everything else would magically be taken care of. During that period, I was exhausted from juggling work and home duties, and I didn't have the energy to confront Anthony about it. Both Anthony and I were only children. My father passed away from an illness when I was in 6th grade, and my mother raised me alone afterward. Don't worry, Margaret. We have your father's life insurance, and I have my job. You don't need to stress about anything. My mother, who worked as a medical secretary, always reassured me with a smile. But I knew she sacrificed her own desires to support my vocational education. She's the most admirable and wonderful woman in my eyes. Now, at 75, she's still thriving. She even has a boyfriend, and they joke about their combined age of 155. They always appear so happy together. On the flip side, Anthony's mother was a difficult woman. She abruptly left with her lover one day, leaving Anthony and his father, Jim, behind. Fortunately, Anthony was away at college by then and didn't rely on parental care. However, Jim struggled to manage both work and unfamiliar household duties. Margaret, promise me you won't cheat. Jim tearfully pleaded with me when I married Anthony. You don't have to excel at housework, and you don't always have to defer to Anthony. But please, I beg you, don't betray him. There's nothing more painful than that. My father-in-law, Jim, is a wealthy man. He generously let us stay in his house rent-free while he lived in a modest rented apartment himself. He's a gentle, caring man who respects our privacy and doesn't interfere unnecessarily in our lives. I have a deep affection and respect for him. I don't want to disappoint him. However, I feel compelled to discuss our divorce and the reasons behind it. After filing for divorce before heading to my parents' house, I stopped by my daughter Tasha's apartment. I wasn't sure if she'd be home or if I'd be intruding, but I decided to visit anyway and found Tasha alone. "What's this about a sudden divorce?" Tasha sputtered in surprise, nearly spilling her coffee. "Are you okay, Mom? You startled me." As Tasha regained her composure, I recounted the entire situation in detail. "So, Dad had been planning this divorce for a while." "Exactly. It's a dreadful situation, isn't it?" Tasha remarked, munching on some cookies I had brought. She's always had a sharp sense of perception. I thought to myself as Tasha glanced up. "Hasn't Dad always been fond of women?" "Well, I snooped on your father's computer once and found countless inappropriate pictures and videos saved. He was frequently away on business trips and social events, so it wouldn't be surprising he was having an affair, but he was always careful before. Now, it seems he intentionally exposed his affair for me to notice. Maybe he wanted to be with that woman openly. By provoking me to hastily file for divorce, he avoided discussions about alimony and property division. That explains why he had the divorce papers ready with a witness signature. And unfortunately, I fell right into his trap," I explained. "Exactly. Despite Anthony's current uncertain job as a day trader, he worked at a prestigious financial institution for years. He likely has savings, and he wouldn't have brought all his severance pay home. If I had approached the divorce calmly, I could have contested for a fair share of his assets," I concluded, echoing Tasha's observations. "I feel like we can't just stay silent, Mom. Dad needs to experience what he's been putting us through," Tasha declared, gripping my hand firmly as tears welled up in my eyes. I nodded, returning her grip. Frustration mingled with regret as tears spilled over. Despite my emotions, I left Tasha behind, unable to accompany me due to incoming guests, and made my way alone to my childhood home. "But he's still your father, Tasha. Are you sure you're okay with this?" I questioned, hesitant about our plan. "Mom, precisely because he's my father, I can't condone his actions. It's embarrassing having friends call him out for his behavior. So yes, I'm okay with it," Tasha affirmed. Her words solidified my resolve to confront my father-in-law. Arriving at my childhood home, I rang the doorbell, firm in my decision. My mother's cheerful voice greeted me as she opened the door, her youthful appearance defying her age. "Margaret, come in. It's chilly out there." I stopped by Tasha's place and warmed up, so I'm fine. "Do come in," she welcomed me with a smile. "Thank you, Mom. I hope I'm not intruding. You and Jim seem to be enjoying yourselves." I apologized, entering the familiar warmth of the house and making my way to the living room. It was a cozy space I had known since childhood, now filled with the love shared between my mother and her partner in their later years. In the living room, I found him engrossed in reading a brochure at the table. "Hello, Jim," I called out, and he looked up with a broad smile. "Margaret, I thought you'd be busy with Christmas preparations by now. Are you all done?" "Yes," I replied, feeling a mix of emotions. My mother's partner is none other than my father-in-law, Anthony's dad. It's a situation where they both harbored feelings for each other for years, but due to their roles as in-laws, they kept those feelings hidden. However, in their twilight years, they confessed to me that they had finally decided to embrace their love. Anthony remains unaware of this. As I gaze at my father-in-law's serene face, so unlike Anthony's, tears start to flow uncontrollably. "What's wrong, Margaret?" Jim's expression shifted to one of concern. My mother, who was carrying a tray with a teacup, must have been startled by my tears. She hurriedly set the tray down on the table and helped me to sit down. "Jim, Mom, I went to the city hall and filed for divorce before coming here," I confessed through tears, recounting the events that had unfolded. Jim seemed particularly stunned by the news. I'm truly sorry to hear about Anthony's affair, Margaret, he offered, bowing his head deeply in apology. It's not your fault, Jim. There's no need for you to apologize. I always emphasized to him that having an affair was the one thing he mustn't do. After what happened with his mother, I assumed Anthony understood that. I replied, watching Jim's expression darken with pain. He reached for his smartphone on the table. Even at 80, he's more adept with a smartphone than I am. Let's call Anthony. We need to have a conversation, Jim declared resolutely, refusing to let Anthony walk away with everything after betraying me. With that, he rose from his seat and quietly exited the living room. A few minutes after Jim left, my phone started ringing. It was Anthony. I ignored the call, but he persisted, calling back almost immediately. After numerous attempts, I finally answered on the 12th ring. What's going on, Margaret? Anthony sounded agitated. Dad called me furious and demanded I come to your parents' place right away. I filed for divorce at City Hall, I replied calmly, knowing this would only confuse him more. Anthony, unaware of Jim's relationship with my mother, was understandably perplexed. Why would you involve Dad? What does this have to do with my parents? Anthony's voice betrayed his confusion. Well, you better come over quickly. You know how strongly Dad feels about fidelity, right? I had to be honest with him about why we're getting divorced. I explained. Anthony was probably worried about upsetting Jim, who had been graciously letting us live in his house rent-free. Despite Jim's remarkable health for his age, Anthony was mindful of his wealth. Is Tasha there too? And your mom? They're all here, along with Jim, of course. I informed him. Anthony abruptly ended the call, likely feeling uneasy about Jim knowing about his affair. As I waited for Anthony in the living room, I noticed Jim examining a brochure for a nursing home. Jim, Mom, are you thinking about moving into a nursing home? I inquired after glancing at the brochure, addressing my mother who was seated at the table. Yes, we are considering it, she confirmed. While Jim and I are managing fine for now, we have to acknowledge our age. We don't know how long we'll be independent. Mom, who affectionately referred to Jim by his name, didn't fit the typical image of a grandmother. So we're exploring options for nursing homes that could accommodate both of us. It's heartwarming to see how close you two are. Your happiness brings me joy as well. But now we have another concern, Margaret. Your sudden divorce, Mom remarked, looking troubled as our conversation continued. Just then, Jim returned, holding a piece of paper in his hand. I was about to inquire about it when the doorbell interrupted us. That must be Anthony. Don't worry, I'll get it, I declared with determination, rising from my seat to answer the door. What's going on? Anthony's face darkened as he caught sight of me. I can't believe you spilled the beans to Jim about my affair. And why here, at your parents' place? Everything will become clear once you step inside. Please come in, I replied calmly. Regardless, I would have done so even if you hadn't instructed me to. As Anthony removed his shoes and hurried into the living room, his steps faltered upon seeing Jim and Mom seated together. Their united presence, reminiscent of a seasoned couple, hinted at the gravity of the situation. Dad, Mom, wait, are you two? Anthony began, his voice trailing off. Sit down, Jim's commanding tone reverberated through the room, instantly straightening my posture. When Jim, typically calm, gets upset, he becomes quite intimidating. I reflected, watching Anthony shrink under his gaze as he took a seat. I heard from Margaret that when she confronted you about your affair, you responded by serving her with divorce papers. Moreover, those papers were filled out, and one of the witnesses was the woman you were cheating with. Is this true? Jim's voice thundered with authority. Well, you see, it's not exactly. Anthony stammered, unable to meet Jim's piercing gaze. Stop evading the question and answer me plainly, Jim demanded, his voice unwavering. Flustered, Anthony finally admitted, yes, it's true. I'm sorry. Anthony, how could you betray Margaret after claiming to be hurt by your mother's affair? And then to have divorce papers ready and pressure her into filing them. It's despicable, Jim chastised, laying out a piece of paper on the table. It was a blank marriage certificate. I wondered whether Anthony had brought it with him or if it had been with Jim from before. Anthony, as you may have guessed, I've been seeing Margaret's mom. Your actions have deeply hurt and insulted my special lady's daughter, Jim continued, his disappointment evident. I had no idea. I never imagined you and my mother-in-law were dating. But that doesn't excuse your infidelity, Anthony interjected, but Jim wasn't swayed. I'm not going to support you anymore. The house I've been letting you stay in for free, I'm selling it immediately. Find an apartment and move out, Jim declared firmly. No way. I don't have the money for rent. Aren't you making money from day trading? Anthony protested, but Jim remained resolute. Whether you have the money or not, I'm selling the house after Christmas. You can't stay there anymore, Jim insisted. Anthony's expression shifted from defiance to anxiety when he noticed the marriage certificate on the table. What's that marriage license for? You're not seriously considering getting married, are you? Anthony blurted out, then gasped and covered his mouth, realizing his mistake. What did you just say? I seized the opportunity to confront him. Your dad has always been so supportive, lending us this house generously. But when he tells you he's remarrying, your first concern is about your inheritance decreasing. That's unacceptable. Exactly. I can't forgive what you've done to Margaret either, my usually silent mother chimed in. Anyway, start looking for an apartment and move out. The house belongs to your dad, and if he wants to sell it, we can't argue with that. But I can't afford rent for two places. One for me and the other, Anthony muttered, then abruptly stopped. But I had heard enough. Are you paying rent for your mistress too? My father-in-law's voice boomed with anger. I'm sorry, Anthony mumbled. You've neglected your responsibilities to the household, and now this. It's an insult to Margaret and Tasha, my mother added, her face flushed with fury. My anger surged, and I felt nauseous. Enough, Anthony. After Christmas, find an apartment and leave. You won't receive any inheritance. I'll spend my wealth freely, and there will be hardly anything left for you, my father-in-law declared firmly, rising from his seat and pointing to the door. Discussion over. Leave. But I don't have that much money, Anthony protested weakly. Quiet. I told you to leave. My father-in-law cut him off sharply. Anthony stood up, defeated, and left the house. He had been living off Jim's wealth, indulging in luxury and showering women with gifts. Watching him stagger away, I felt no sympathy. As Christmas arrived, Jim followed through on his word, putting the house up for sale, and it sold quickly. Anthony found himself in a shabby, budget apartment after losing his luxurious residence. It turned out he had been living off his retirement savings for the past decade without making any serious attempts at day trading. He had likely assumed he could rely on Jim's wealth eventually. However, once he could no longer afford to support his mistress, she promptly ended their relationship. It seemed Anthony had been using his supposed inheritance to attract women. But when the money ran out, so did their interest. Now Anthony leads a solitary life, juggling multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet. Jim sold the house and compensated me with the proceeds. With that money, I purchased a small yet cozy condo where I now enjoy a comfortable lifestyle. I've built a fulfilling life, hosting friends for meals on my days off or visiting my parents' home, now occupied by Tasha. Meanwhile, my parents officially tied the knot and became a genuine couple. The meaning of dad has shifted for me, and my father now casually calls me by my name, Margaret. Witnessing my hardworking mother's radiant smile fills me with immense joy. I wholeheartedly wish for my parents, embracing newfound happiness in their later years, to enjoy peaceful days ahead.